One deal changed everything. A $15 million check landed in the boxing world through Dana White's Zuffa Boxing, paid to a fighter most MMA fans had never heard of. And in the weeks that followed, things started to shift inside the UFC roster. Several top fighters reportedly began making serious decisions about their future, with some even stepping away from long-term UFC plans to explore boxing opportunities. So let me talk about what really happened and why this could be the start of a much bigger movement inside the UFC. On April 11, 2026, a bloodied Conor Benn continued his march towards a world title shot with a points victory over a faded Regis Prograis at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. The bout was the co-main event on the Tyson Fury vs. Alexander Usyk card, and all three judges scored the bout 98-92 in favor of the Brit, who outworked and outfought former junior welterweight champion Prograis. But nobody was talking about the scorecards. They were talking about the check. The talk before the fight was not of the fight, but of Benn's reported $15 million switch from his longtime promoter Eddie Hearn's Matchroom to rival Zuffa Boxing and Dana White. That figure, $15 million, guaranteed for a single 10-round bout, had landed in the combat sports world like a grenade back in February when the deal was first announced.
It was Benn's first outing since his much-publicized two fights with Chris Eubank Jr. last year, and since parting ways with lifelong promoter Matchroom Kadam, having signed a high-profile one-fight deal with Dana White's Zuffa Boxing outfit in February. And after the fight, according to reports, Benn will now become a free agent as his contract with Zuffa Boxing has apparently expired. One fight, $15 million, free agent. That sequence of words hit different when you are a UFC champion, making a fraction of that number. To put it in perspective, no UFC fighter has ever publicly disclosed earning a flat $15 million purse. While Conor McGregor banked massive money for his fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov and Brock Lesnar scored big at UFC 200, the final numbers were heavily supplemented by pay-per-view points. The Benn deal was different. It was a flat guarantee. No PPV points, no performance bonuses needed, just cold, hard contractual cash for one night of work. The story gets even more eye-popping when you look at what Benn did with that money within hours of the fight ending. Benn showed off two new car purchases, a Ferrari F12 Superfast valued at $250,000 and a custom Porsche 911 Turbo S Cabriolet with his face and name on the side panel, also worth north of $250,000.
$500,000 in cars the morning after a fight? That is what a $15 million payday looks like. Meanwhile, back in the UFC, the pay structure tells a very different story. UFC fighter pay in 2026 ranges from lower-level show and win contracts to multi-million-dollar purses for champions and major stars. But even those multi-million-dollar purses pale compared to what Benn just collected. It is believed that the career-high paydays of Max Holloway and Charles Oliveira may not exceed even a fifth of Benn's guaranteed fee. These are two of the most beloved fighters in the history of the sport. Between them, they have headlined dozens of main events, produced some of the most iconic finishes in UFC history, and helped grow the sport into a billion-dollar enterprise. And yet, here is Conor Benn, a boxer who, as one UFC star bluntly noted, many MMA fans had never even heard of, walking away with more money from a single night than most UFC champions earn.
The British boxer left longtime promoter Eddie Hearn and his Matchroom Boxing to sign with the Dana White promotion, which operates under TKO Group Holdings, the parent company for UFC. That last part is the key. The same corporate umbrella, the same parent company, the same decision makers at the top, and yet the compensation for fighters under that umbrella could not be more different. Former UFC middleweight champion Israel Adesanya looked at the $15 million figure attached to a single fight and asked a simple question. If that is possible under the same promotional umbrella, why not for UFC fighters too? In a YouTube video that racked up millions of views, the former two-time middleweight king did not hold back. We know these boxers are the best in the world at what they do, but so are we. This is the UFC. We love ultimate fighting, not limited fighting. I want $15 million for one fight too.
The statement was a thunderclap. One of the organization's biggest names on a public platform, essentially telling his own boss that the math does not add up. Then came Sean O'Malley, the former bantamweight champion and one of the UFC's most bankable stars. His reaction was dripping with disbelief and a certain stinging honesty. "I do not even know who Conor Benn is," O'Malley said. "He's supposedly a pretty big name in boxing, but I have never heard of him."
It is crazy, bro. If they really paid this guy $15 million, I do not know. It is crazy how you put in so much work in the UFC, build this name, create this character, be a star. I am not making $15 million to fight. O'Malley, to his credit, tried to see both sides. It is also a business, and if they think it's a good move and that guy is going to bring in money, I get it, he added. Business is business. He hates Oscar De La Hoya, hates Eddie Hearn, so it is like, let us take their biggest star and pay them. I can see it being an ego thing, but even with that caveat, the underlying resentment was unmistakable. Here was a fighter who had done everything the UFC system asked of him, built a character, sold pay-per-views, finished opponents in spectacular fashion, and he was looking at numbers from a sister company that dwarfed his own earnings. Former UFC flyweight champion Demetrius Johnson also weighed in. Like O'Malley, he had not heard of Benn prior to the signing. $15 million for one fight? It is crazy, Johnson said. Is Khamzat Chimaev making $15 million? Is Ilia Topuria making $15 million? Is Merab Dvalishvili making $15 million? We do not know because those numbers are always hidden, but I truly believe it is a flex from Dana White.
And perhaps the most devastating blow came from Matchroom's Eddie Hearn, the very promoter who had lost Benn to Zuffa in the first place. Hearn, still wounded from having his prized boxer poached, turned the knife on the UFC's fighter pay model. Hearn said UFC fighters must be sick as a dog seeing Benn's deal. If you are a UFC fighter, you are looking at this Zuffa and going, what the hell? I am being absolutely ripped off here. He poured gasoline on a fire that was already roaring. I think there will be a revolt from the UFC fighters, to be honest, Hearn said, because I think they will be thinking, why are we making so much less than the boxers when the show and the business and the revenue are so much higher? Max Holloway urged UFC competitors to know your worth in light of the financial disparities highlighted by the Benn signing. When a fighter as universally respected as Holloway tells his peers to reassess their value, it carries seismic weight. This was not just talk anymore. Something was shifting beneath the surface. If the Benn deal was the spark, the exodus of fighters from the UFC orbit into boxing and rival promotions was the wildfire. The frustration did not stay confined to
Heavyweight champion Tom Aspinall said, "I think it has bothered everyone if one guy is getting paid $15 million and the other is getting $15,000. That is a big difference, which is one of the reasons I want to explore other options." And explore he did. Eddie Hearn signed Tom Aspinall after seeing the Conor Benn deal making headlines, bringing the UFC heavyweight champion into the Matchroom talent agency fold. A staggering, provocative move that sent shockwaves through the MMA community. John Jones, the most dominant fighter in UFC history, requested his release from the organization after seeing the disparity between what Benn earned and what the UFC was offering him for potential super fights. Francis Ngannou had already walked away from the UFC in 2023 over pay disputes, and Ronda Rousey signed with Most Valuable Promotions, Jake Paul's boxing promotion, further fracturing the UFC's monopoly on elite
And so far, their biggest signings have been cruiserweight supreme Jai Opetaia and British star Conor Benn. Meanwhile, the UFC's own pay structure remained a lightning rod for criticism. Lawsuit texts revealed details on UFC's entry-level pay of $10,000 to show, $10,000 to win. Many analysts believe UFC fighters receive a significantly lower percentage of revenue than athletes in leagues like the NBA or NFL. This has become a central issue in the ongoing debate about fairness and long-term sustainability in MMA. When pressed about the disparity, White offered an olive branch of sorts. Despite his assurances, the fighter pay issue continues to follow White, to the extent that he is now forced to acknowledge that it will increase. In recent days, the matter intensified, especially after Benn joined Zuffa Boxing. The development reportedly unsettled several UFC fighters, particularly with questions around their own payouts still remaining unresolved. Colby Covington, a former UFC welterweight champion, has publicly criticized the promotion's negotiation tactics. Covington claims the UFC forces fighters to accept take-it-or-leave-it contract terms, leaving them to choose between financial stability and their own worth. He believes this approach feels less like a partnership and more like a dictatorship.
As fighters are essentially independent contractors treated as disposable assets, the UFC did make some concessions in 2026, though critics argued they were crumbs off a very large table. Beginning in January 2026, starting with UFC 324, the UFC increased its post-fight bonus structure, raising Performance of the Night and Fight of the Night awards from $50,000 to $100,000, and introducing additional $25,000 bonuses for any knockout or submission not selected among the standard 4 post-fight awards. But when your base purse for newer fighters is $10,000 and the company just signed a boxer for $15 million, doubling a bonus from 50 to 100 does not exactly quiet the storm. So here we are. Benn collected his $15 million, went the distance with Regis Prograis, bought a Ferrari and a Porsche, and walked away a free agent. Ryan Garcia became world champion back in February with a unanimous decision win against Mario Barrios and has been linked to a clash against Benn. There are many indications that a duel with WBC world champion Ryan Garcia is planned next, a fight that would likely earn Benn even more than the $15 million he just pocketed.
Meanwhile, back in the UFC, the consequences of this one deal continue to reverberate. When fighters like Israel Adesanya and Sean O'Malley react to Benn's reported payday, it is not just about one boxer or one contract. It highlights a bigger question fighters keep asking behind the scenes. If both sports now operate under the same corporate umbrella at TKO, will the economics eventually start to look more similar too? The structural issue at the heart of this entire saga is not new. The modern version of leverage is simple. Accept the terms or risk long periods without fights or income. Most fighters still face what is informally known as the Ngannou dilemma. Sign a long-term deal to secure title opportunities or risk being sidelined. Top boxers often earn more due to greater negotiating power and access to multiple promoters and broadcasters. The UFC offers more structure and consistency, but critics argue this centralized model limits fighter leverage and earning potential. But what has changed decisively and perhaps irreversibly is that the comparison is no longer abstract. It used to be that UFC fighters would look across at Floyd Mayweather or Canelo Alvarez and shrug. Those were different universes, different sports, different economics. Now, the comparison sits under the same corporate roof.
Benn earned $15 million for his bout with Regis Prograis under a TKO-backed partnership. Crucially, Benn retains free agent flexibility after his one-fight deal, a privilege UFC fighters like Jon Jones do not enjoy. Matt Brown summed up the complicated reality. Could it get to a breaking point is the question? And when people like Jon Jones stand up and say, "I am not going to fight for $15 million, that is when I think the ball can roll a little bit. But it is more like nudging the ball. The UFC remains a powerhouse. They are the top of the world, Brown said. Everybody else is fighting for scraps way at the bottom. There is not even a close second. And that is exactly why this story matters. The UFC is not under existential threat. Nobody is suggesting the organization is about to fold or lose its dominance. What is happening is something more subtle, and in many ways, more significant. Whether or not the UFC